I first met George when I went to a homecoming at Los Angeles College of Chiropractic, and George was a guest speaker at our homecoming. I had graduated from chiropractic college a couple years earlier, and we were all gathered in the auditorium to listen to our guest speaker. And George had picked me out of the audience, and he was going to demonstrate a weak transverse oblique abdominal muscle on me. And I was thinking to myself, well, this is going to be a joke. I just recently had won the award Mr. Arizona, and I could do 100 sit-ups in 60 seconds. And George called a second person.
At that time, he looked like that, and he still does.
To add insult to injury, George called a second person out of the audience to come up to stand beside the table to catch me, which I also thought was a big joke. And he put me in the testing position and pushed on me, and I was glad that that person was there to catch me because I went down. And all my sit-ups and lifting weights didn't seem to have helped me a bit. Needless to say, I was very impressed. I couldn't wait to get back to my office to share my newfound knowledge with my colleagues. I've always been in a group practice. And I went back to my office on Monday morning to share my newfound knowledge on muscle testing with my colleagues. And everything I attempted to do did not work. And I looked like a fool trying to explain these procedures to my colleagues. And it so happened that I saw George speak the second time only 3 months later. And this time I got it. This time I got it. I went back to my office, and I was able to duplicate it, what it was that he was doing. I was able to make it work. And in George's words, if you catch on fire about what you're doing, people will come from miles around to watch you burn. I had a very successful nutritional practice at that time, and after I did the kinesiology, my waiting list went from 6 weeks to 3 months. And my life was changed forever from that day forward. Cindy and I were fortunate enough to be at the original meeting of the Dirty Dozen. And John Thie and George and myself were at that meeting, which even preceded Wally Schmidt. I think Wally was at the second meeting. And we'd gotten together at the Metro Hotel at the airport in Detroit, Michigan. And the Dirty Dozen shared their discoveries. The reason we were there is because George had named us study group leaders. And we shared our techniques with each other. And we were all doing experimentation with kinesiology, and we were sending our results to George, and George would give us the father blessing. And we became study group leaders. And I remember a couple of things from that first meeting. One thing was Cindy and I had only recently met, and Alan Beardall was there with his wife. And Alan Beardall's wife called me on the phone from her room to my room and said, "Who's that hussy you're with?" And that was over 30 years ago, and that hussy has become my beautiful wife. one of the Dirty Dozen who was there was a doctor from Ashland, Kentucky, Dr. John Hughes. And on the second day of our meeting, John Hughes stood up and said to the group, he said, "Last night I had a dream. And in my dream, an angel came to me and said, 'Where in the world would you like to be? You can be anywhere in the world that you would like to be. Where would you like to be?' And he said, 'I want to be at this meeting of the Dirty Dozen.'" And all of us who were at that meeting looked back at that time, and we all had the same feeling as John Hughes did, that we were privileged to be at that meeting. We were so fortunate to be on the ground floor because we got to learn the material as it was being discovered, whereas today, to come into applied kinesiology, the amount of material is overwhelming, which has inspired me to write a book on shortcuts. So the situation reminds me of a true story about Alfred Nobel. Alfred Nobel, you may know that he was the discoverer of dynamite. And Alfred Nobel had a brother who lived in Stockholm, Sweden, who died. So Alfred Nobel goes to the funeral of his brother in Stockholm, Sweden, and whoever had written the obituary for the brother who had died had mixed up the two brothers. And they wrote the obituary that it was Alfred who had died. And the obituary read about this horrible, destructive substance that he had invented called dynamite, and what a menace it was to the world. And Alfred Nobel realized that he better do something different in his life, otherwise he would be remembered for creating this horrible, destructive stuff called dynamite. And that was what was the motivation and the origin for what we now know today as the Nobel Peace Prizes. So George, you may not have discovered dynamite, but what you discovered is dynamite.